The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has condemned Egypt's ruthless violence and inhuman acts during crackdown on protests in Cairo. Navi Pillay urged Egypt's ruling military junta to act now or warned that themselves risk future prosecution for complicity in serious crimes. Referring to the recent crackdown on protests, she warned that such actions fuel further anger and dissent across Egypt. Pillay also stressed that, quote, the ruthless violence being used against women protesters is especially shocking. She also pointed to reports of the ill treatment of women in detention. Pillay's remarks come as reports say military forces in Cairo have killed at least 3 more anti-junta protesters, bringing the number of protesters killed in the past 4 days to 14. The protesters are calling for the transfer of power from the military to a civilian government. Meanwhile, the Amnesty International has called for halting arms transfer to Egypt, this amid continuing clampdown on protesters by the country's military forces. The Amnesty says it's no longer acceptable to supply the Egyptian army with types of weaponry being used against protesters. The rights body has also slammed the Egyptian military for using excessive force, which has led to the death of several civilians over the past few days. The ruling junta has accused third parties and foreign powers of being behind the violence, but the protesters dismiss the claim. Joining us now via Skype from Idaho is Mark Glenn. He's with the Crescent Cross Solidarity Movement. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV. Now, the UN and the Amnesty International have expressed their concerns over the deadly crackdown on protesters, but the West, particularly the U.S., remains silent. Why is that? You'd think they would have figured out a policy for Egypt and the awakening in the region by now.
Well, the United States has to remain silent on this because the United States is up to its eyeballs in it. Those weapons that are being used against those protesters, after all, were not made in Egypt. They were made in the United States and in other Western countries. And so the United States has to stand back from this and not register too much noise for fear of the obvious hypocrisy that is going to be apparent as a result of this. So it is business as usual. Personally, I am somewhat surprised that the United States has not yet, and I do stress that word yet, decided to make some noise about it because, after all, the United States and other Western countries are always very eager to criticize Middle Eastern countries whenever anything such as this takes place, of course, in the interest of painting the West as being enlightened and democratic, and the West would never do such things against her own people, as we see taking place in Egypt and these other Middle Eastern countries. So we'll just have to wait and see what develops. I'm sure that there are many backroom deals that are being made at present. And the other thing that we have to keep in mind, Kenise, is that as the Egyptian government is noting that there are third parties and foreign elements that may be involved in this, that equates to the United States. The United States has been on the ground, as well as other Western countries, in Egypt and these other Arab countries, beginning last year with the uprisings in Tunisia, and certainly in Egypt as well. And so, for the United States, at this juncture, after it has poured tens of millions of dollars into helping to foment some of these uprisings, at this point, it has to pull back. She has to pull back and kind of stay out of the limelight, as it were.
But the ruling junta is no honest broker either. Looking at the brutal crackdown, these are not the actions of a regime that intends to relinquish power for the sake of democracy. Aren't the concerns of these protesters valid?
Sure, absolutely. There is no good guy, bad guy in all of this, except for, of course, the people on the street who are risking life, limb, and everything else in order to get their freedom. But you're right, the junta, the Egyptian government, there is no good guy involved in this. The foreign players who are involved in helping to foment these uprisings, there are no good guys in this either. It's one of these tragic situations where it is a struggle between several evil factions, and unfortunately it's the innocent people, the people who genuinely are hungering and thirsting for their freedom, for their human dignity, are the ones who become victims in all of it.
And other than the silence from the West, analysts point out that the SCAF thinks it can get away with such a crackdown because it believes it enjoys a lot of support, considering the huge voter turnout in the elections recently. Would you agree with that?
No, I would not. I think that in the end, the writing is on the wall here that the ruling council, the military ruling council, is going to be pushed out. You will see an Islamist government come to power in Egypt for the simple reason that this is what the West and Israel, as crazy as it sounds, this is exactly what they want to see happen. They would love to see secular governments in the region fall to Islamist groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood, and particularly in Egypt, because Israel would love nothing more than to set up a situation where a state of war exists between Egypt and Israel, so that Israel has a reason to reinvade the Sinai and to take back that territory that she was forced to give up at the Camp David Peace Accords in 1979.
All right, we're going to just have to wait and see how this continues to develop. That was Mark Glenn with the Crescent and Cross Solidarity Movement joining us via Skype from Idaho. Mr. Glenn, as always, we thank you for your comments here on Press TV.